All right, welcome to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, whether you're in your car, your home, your kitchen, wherever you're at. We appreciate you for listening. My name is Caleb Talley. I am the Director of Marketing and Events here at the Startup Junkie Foundation. I'm joined with my co-hosts, Jeff Amrine and Matthew Ward. And we have a special guest today. We are joined by Jeff Starling. Jeff Starling is the managing partner of The Source. Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, guys.
So, Jeff, tell us, what is The Source for those who are listening?
We are a medical cannabis dispensary in Bentonville, Arkansas. We got to be part of the medical marijuana community that started here in 2018 after a very long process, but we are a full service dispensary and welcome all medical patients.
Awesome. So Jeff, tell us a little bit about your background. I've read your bio. You've been around the world. You've studied marketing. What led you to this field?
Well, in 2000, I believe 14 was the original vote to get medical added to the ballot for voting, and it missed by a very, very small margin. So the writing was kind of on the wall. We got our forces in gear working towards the next vote that came 2 years later. And I don't want to use the word landslide, but it was definitely in the favor for a medical program to get started. So one of our partners had a lot of connections out west in states that had already gone through the medical process on to even recreational. So we got the guys that knew what they were doing already, put together a fantastic application through a team effort, and we're fortunate to come out on the other side with a license.
In an industry like yours is, I imagine, incredibly regulated. Tell us a little bit about that process. I mean, when normally we meet with or talk with entrepreneurs, seldom are they starting something that probably requires as many hurdles or hoops to jump through as I imagine what y'all have to or have had to jump through.
The unique situation that we're in is that we got to be a part of a brand new industry opening up. It really had no history. There was nothing to fall back on. So these states, as new states come on board, they kind of lean on these states that have already gotten these programs going. So fortunately for us, they followed suit with some of the states that had done limited licensure. Again, we were very lucky to be awarded a license, but yeah, I mean, heavily regulated process. They call it from seed to sale, which is every little bit of each plant that's grown is accounted for and has to be accounted for through the state's tracking system. So it definitely creates a lot of inventory issues that most people can write off as dunnage and waste, and we can't. We have to account for everything. So there's a lot of regulations, a lot of things that we've got to keep track of, but we've got a great management team that's really taking care of that.
As a follow-up to that, Jeff, there's obviously lots of anecdotal evidence of the medicinal aspects that come from the various different compounds that are in marijuana, and for that matter in hemp and whatnot. Do you see a time when there's enough peer-reviewed research and enough double-blind clinical studies so that the fog around this whole area kind of goes away, where people can say, yeah, absolutely, there was a large study done and it's better than NSAIDs for pain management, et cetera, et cetera? How do you see that part of it going? Because that's one area where it's kind of a head scratcher for those of us that look at traditional pharmaceuticals and all that goes on with them typically.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area because pretty much the only evidence that we really have right now is anecdotal on a larger scale. But the thing that I think a few years ago, the federal government opened up the ability to research. There were like 3 or 4 locations in the entire country that had the approval to research cannabis as medicine, and a few of those were in the university systems. But that legislation that passed a couple of years ago really opened it up to anybody that has a research facility can now attempt to process this plant into actual medicines that will help people. But, just in its raw form itself, there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that this is medicine. So to answer your question, I think that those reports and that research is happening on a larger scale now than it ever has before. And with that, we will see more push for legalization because, at the end of the day, what that legislation did was it allowed the big pharmaceutical companies to start to take place in this segment. And with that, with the amount of money that will be put towards research and development of different treatments, I really think we're going to start to see a lot of things change, especially attitudes and availability of cannabis and cannabis-derived materials, really being part of the mainstream.
And I imagine you've probably seen some of those attitudes change just with the passage of, medical marijuana in Arkansas, whereas somebody, 15 years ago may have been vehemently opposed to marijuana in a medical setting, with it passing, even at the state level, have their attitudes, I guess, warm up to that. I think my parents, just using an example, would have probably sent me downriver if they thought I'd, used medical marijuana, 15 years ago. But I feel like, today they're a little more, I don't know. It seems like attitudes have changed a little bit. Have you seen that already?
Oh yeah. I mean, we met with, there was some resistance to us opening our location in Bentonville. Because everybody thinks it's going to bring crime and, this counterculture attitude. It's just going to be this sore spot and everybody's going to, it's just going to be prevalent, be everywhere. And it's really not. I mean, to be honest, it was already here. People can be more open about it and everybody's paying taxes on it now. So the attitudes are definitely shifting. This is becoming major industry in this country. And I see more people trying to find a way to get into the business than opposing it these days. But that being said, there will always be the people that tend to be a bit more conservative. And I think as the medicinal side of it develops and we start to have more reports done by lab science and everything like that, this attitude is going to continue to change.
I suspect some of that, Jeff, will change when it's, you're not going to the dispensary and buying a bud and smoking it up or whatever. When it's coming in pill form or something else from a pharmacy, then it's going to be like, yeah, no big deal. Now it still seems like, it's a little on the edge because everybody, those of us of my age, and we can't help it, we're thinking about Cheech and Chong movies. I mean, it's all the comedy associated with it, even though there is, these medicinal aspects that are coming out. And I have one follow-on question, which I think is really important as your business grows. So the states are individually taking action to legalize either medical or recreational or both. The federal government still treats it as a controlled substance, and that makes it really painful, as I understand it, from a standpoint of banking relationships. How are you guys working your way through that, given that it's still federally controlled? And how do you see that opening up?
I think both sides of the aisle right now are trying to push some legislation through that loosens the restrictions on banking. I mean, first and foremost, let's be totally honest here. The tax revenue that is generated by this industry is remarkable. And states are starting to look at this as, ways to get around budget deficits. And I think the economics of this is starting to outweigh the politics of this. And like I said, fortunately, it seems both sides have some movement on that. I know the Dems are really pushing the CARES Act, which will allow, FDIC coverage to remain on banks that are doing, that are involved in the cannabis industry. So there is so much money at play right now, especially tax dollars, that yes, the federal government could come in at any point in time and say, no, we're not doing this anymore. But I think the resistance they would get whether a blue state or a red state, would be pretty massive right now.
Yeah.
So I think that the attitude and the temperature on a larger scale is moving towards eventual legalization. And again, I think a lot of it is economically driven.
Hey, Jeff, something I'd be curious about is what are your typical customers, and has there been any surprises with the patterns there?
Yeah, 100%. So, full honesty, going into this, we expected to get a lot of that, I'll just say Cheech and Chong culture, a little bit more of the counterculture as customers. But, Northwest Arkansas, we've got a pretty large retiree community, especially up north in Bentonville. We draw a lot of our customers from Bella Vista. So if I told you right now that our largest customer base is, 55 to 7-year-old women, I think we'd all be surprised, and I'm still surprised saying that to you. So we get the whole gamut. It's not really centralized in any demographic, certainly not the demographics that we thought we would see. I'm sure stores in Fayetteville might have a different answer to that question just based on the demographics of Fayetteville. But yeah, it's been a bit of a surprise with the client base that we've had, coming out of the gates.
And do you think that, as I guess the stigma fades and as, lawmakers kind of see the economic benefit, do you think that recreational marijuana is inevitable? And if so, how do you position yourself, or I guess the source, with that possibility in mind, whether that be, 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road?
Every move we make in the back of our mind is towards full legalization. We'd be foolish not to. Obviously we have our foot in the door at the forefront of this industry in Arkansas. So it definitely gives us a lot of lead time on people that might be getting in later under a looser licensure requirement. But everything we do is aimed at full legalization at some point. I mean, we're scaling. It hit the news. It was on Talk Business and Politics last week that we are planning a move. So I don't have any problem saying that now. We are going to be building a purpose-driven facility to encompass all of the different angles of the industry that we're licensed to be involved in, and it's a large enough facility to give us the room to scale for not only full state legalization in Arkansas, but on a federal level. Ultimately, hopefully, at some point, allowing interstate commerce.
Well, I'm going to ask another question. It's been just a real point of curiosity for me. If we rolled the time back to Prohibition, there were a lot of people with nationally recognized names that there's no kind way to say they were bootleggers, like Joe Kennedy, for example. I mean, he was 100% tied in with the Irish mob and others, and was a bootlegger. And those illicit days, they were making a ton of money, no taxation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they all went legit and legalized and got into legitimate businesses afterwards. So the thing I was real curious about, as this legalization is occurring, what's all the illicit black market organized crime? What are those guys doing at this point? I mean, do you see them? Are there rumblings? Do you ever get some weird approaches from people you really don't want to know? Or how is that whole underworld market for marijuana adapting to legalization from your perspective?
I mean, you've got to think that they're tightening up on all angles. I mean, all sides of their business. The fact that there's legal outlets that people can go into, not be breaking the law, get a quality of product that is lab tested, that can prove that there aren't any, metals or chemicals or pesticides, or, when you're buying the black market, you really don't know what you're getting other than what they're standing there telling you. We can produce lab reports that show, the lack of these trace elements, because honestly, if they had them in there, they wouldn't be approved for sale. So, California, they had their gray area for a long time before they went full legalized. Fully legit, we'll call it, last year. I've got friends that have lived out there for a long time, and they said that transition was next to impossible, which really limited out the amount of legal players moving forward. But there's still a lot of illicit shops out there. Obviously, we never had that gray area here in Arkansas, so I can't say that it's apples to apples in that situation. But there's still a lot of illegally open shops in California, but there's only so much DEA manpower that they can only raid and close so many shops in a given day. So I'm very, very happy we don't have to deal with any of that here in Arkansas. And the way that the state regulates the movement of product within our market, there really is no angle for some illegal supplier to come in, because every cent of every gram that is purchased through our store is tracked. So we couldn't, there's be no way for somebody to try to cheat the system and have outside product that didn't ultimately have a tag from the original supplier.
Do you see that also, that level of scrutiny on who the funds that might be investing? For example, I could see the cartels coming up with holding companies a couple of steps removed from who they really are, and then investing in the consolidation of a lot of the legal operations. Do you see some of that stuff as a possibility, or is there a lot of scrutiny on kind of follow the money?
There is a lot of scrutiny on follow the money. When we applied in Arkansas, we had to show proof of assets that were audited. We all had federal background checks, all of the partners involved. So, as far as Arkansas is concerned, I think they were very, very careful on what money they allowed to get into the market. Obviously, I can't speak for everywhere,
Sure.
And there's always going to be some of that element that somebody tries to squeeze through. But, in the U.S. anymore, there are publicly traded companies that deal primarily in cannabis. So this is as much. I'll just say we're making this very American here by letting big business and big, corporate conglomerates come in and start to eat up licenses in some of these states. So I think that we might, as Americans, weed out that criminal element by just throwing that business element into it. And
that was good. Weed out. I like that.
If I'll tell you anything, the interviews that I do regarding this industry, there are more puns and more
you can't help it, right?
I'll say that I'm not even thinking about, or other people will say with a lot of intent to see if they can get me to react to it.
Sure, that's great. Really good. So what's coming next? I mean, it sounds like you're positioning for the eventuality of recreational use and all possibilities. But do you see yourselves growing beyond the boundaries of the state? Is this going to be a national play for you? What's the vision?
As more and more states come into licensure and start, adopting at least medical programs, what you have in a lot of places are people with the money, people with the access to the licenses, whether it be who they know or, we'll just leave that open for interpretation, but they don't have the expertise. They don't have the know-how to actually get these operations up and running, and being, helping start the Arkansas industry and being one of the first players, we're getting that knowledge of how to approach states for the first time that are just kind of getting those programs going. So, I'm not going to sit here and call myself an expert, but to guys in Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia that are just now getting through the legislation process of getting their programs going, I am an expert. So I think as our group kind of learns more and more through what we've done in Arkansas, we'll look elsewhere. It's difficult with ownership requirements that states have to maintain so much within the state boundaries. Usually it's at least a majority share, 51%, that has to go to a state resident. So, it makes it a little more difficult with how much you're willing to put into play in those markets. But we've got our feelers out. I'll just put it that way.
Gotcha.
And I'm curious, the way I understand it, all the product has to be grown in Arkansas, right?
Correct.
So given that Arkansas is such an agrarian state, such a, farming centric state, how does the product square with, product grown elsewhere? Like Arkansas obviously grows rice really well and grows all these other things really well. How does that square with marijuana?
So most of the operations that we've been dealing with in Arkansas thus far have been indoor grows. It seems to be, especially with the wonderful weather we have here in Arkansas, that not only is unpredictable, but we have just absolutely brutal summers. So they've kind of forced all these growers to go indoors. And a lot of what you see is they hire consultants from, full legal states, Oregon, Colorado, California being some of the bigger sources of these quote unquote experts. You're not reinventing the wheel here. They bring in the operations that they've been testing and running for years that just translates to another indoor facility. I will say our quality of product is pretty good. I mean, it's for us being 18 months into the industry, it's at a high quality. Neighboring states like Oklahoma that just what we like to lovingly refer to as the Wild West. It was a 3-page application and $500 to get a cultivation permit. And I think the quality of their product shows that they didn't have very stringent requirements on who they were allowed to grow. So I'm happy that Arkansas did it the way they did. Obviously, I'm sure everybody's been hearing in the news, there's a supply shortage in the state. And that's only related to the huge spike in patient cards that they didn't assume. A lot of that was related to COVID. People were holed up in their houses and realized that they could get on the phone with a doctor and get a card. So they originally expected 60,000 to be our mature market. After 2 to 3 years, and a year and a half in, we're at 85. So,
wow.
The original licensure arrangement that the state set up, I don't think ever accounted for those numbers. So we're, as owners, and we have some ability to grow in our facility. We're very anxious to see kind of what the state does in regards to that.
That's too. I think you see, compared to when Oklahoma passed medical marijuana, they had shops open in 3 months, and it was 2 years before Arkansas had anything, had the infrastructure to even open a store. It seemed like.
Yeah, and it's wild because we've got, I think there's still 8 dispensaries that aren't opened. There is one of the first 5 initial cultivators that still is not producing product. So they've gone out and issued the other 3 cultivation licenses to get at least the supply side, up to speed as quickly as possible. But, those other 3 guys, they're going to be 18 months to 2 years before they're going to be fully operational. These aren't just, hey, let's go throw some seeds in the ground out back. These are massive warehouse operations with individual grow rooms and everything set to CO2 and humidity detectors and everything. They keep all the rooms isolated. These are huge operations. So it's going to take some time for the supply to become mature here, and I just have a feeling that pinch is going to be on the customer for a little while longer.
Do you see some things happening to improve the density of what can be grown in a warehouse, and vertical grow ups or hydroponics? Are there some innovations that are going to improve the output per square foot on an indoor?
I think one of the biggest transitions you're seeing in the industry right now is the change from high pressure sodium, which has kind of been the tried and true method of indoor production, to LEDs and, lighting that's a little less draw. It has a lot less HVAC requirements because it's just not producing the heat that those high pressure sodiums do. And it causes everybody's bills to come down, certainly, because your power needs are way, far reduced from the high pressure sodium. So that's kind of the biggest thing you're seeing. But one thing that you look at this industry, it's a ton of mad scientists. It's people that love the product but have a background in something else. I mean, you meet more people that are chemical engineers that are running processing in these for these cannabis companies, because the science is the same. Your input materials are just a lot different. Yeah. So we always like to talk about, we'll just see what the mad scientists come up with next. And what we're trying to do right now is associate ourselves with the mad scientists that we think are onto things. So that we try to be kind of first movers in that regard. And it's very much an industry about being first movers and coming up with that next new thing, or at least being able to bring it to your state first.
And I had another question, and not to get political on the podcast, but there's an issue on the ballot this year that kind of, had this been passed, 10 years ago, it might have prevented medical marijuana from ever having reached the ballot in Arkansas. And that's issue 3, as far as kind of limiting what the general public can put on on the ballot. Do you see that as possibly a threat to, getting to that point of maybe recreational or sort of changes in your industry specifically?
Well, assuming everybody does the right thing and votes no for it, maybe not this go around, but no, I mean, it's something that definitely needs to be aware of. I don't feel like I'm getting myself in any trouble saying that the powers that be in Arkansas did not want this. They made every hurdle and bit of red tape to go through in order for anybody to get approved here. But the people voted, the people spoke. This is what they wanted. This is how our government is supposed to be set up, that we as the people have the right to put things on a ballot that we want to see voted on. I think the time for the government to try to take these actions is getting behind them. I think that this is, this industry is a freight train that they can try to stand in front of. But at the end of the day, the tax dollars generated here, it's going to help people. They talk about the Emerald Triangle in Northern California was completely saved by the legalization of cannabis. You had an area that had no industry, had no money. People were just out of jobs, didn't have any. And then all of a sudden the rules changed. They found that area was so beneficial for the growth of cannabis, especially outdoors. And all of a sudden you've introduced industry and jobs, and again, the economics kind of outweighed the politics of it. So I think that, especially as this creates jobs and creates source of revenues for small towns that, like Newport, Arkansas has got 2 grow facilities now. The tax revenue that are going to be generated by those 2 facilities, Newport's about to look like a very different place. So I think that when you start to see these small towns get this industry moving in, and all of a sudden there's tax revenue and jobs, and again, the economics become way more important, you're going to start to see, people's eyes are opening up. Arkansas was one of the first Bible Belt states to vote yes for a medical program. And I know that we're the guinea pig for some of these other states. Mississippi they've got bills right now to skip medical and go straight legal. So, and they're gaining ground. I mean, there is a distinct possibility that Mississippi could have recreational before we do. So, I mean, that freight train is just chugging forward right now. And Jeff knows, my family, we're in the train business. So, trying to shut that train down right now it's going to be very difficult.
Well, I can definitely see Mississippi doing that, because they're no longer going to beat us at football. They've got to jump us in something, right?
Hey,
the world order has been restored, where the
there you
2
go.
reliable wins we have every year are Ole Miss and Mississippi State. So,
hey, to throw another pun out there for you, we're definitely very high on Pittman. I'll tell you that much.
he was a good hire. He's got the right attitude, and man, the turnaround has been, not to get too much into Razorback football, but for me, a good Saturday is defined by if Navy somehow squeaks out a win and Arkansas wins, it doesn't matter what else happens.
There you go.
That's great. So, hey, to kind of land the plane, Jeff, one of the questions we ask all the entrepreneurs that come on is, so you've been on this journey, and I know you've been in lots of investment interest. You're involved with us in Cattering Capital and whatnot. You've seen lots of deals, done a lot of stuff in your career. But if you knew 3, 4, 5 years ago, before you launched into the venture we're talking about here, The Source, what you know now, what would you have done differently? And as a result of that, what advice would you give people that are launching into new industry, new field, et cetera?
It was so, the scoring came out and everything. And I'll be honest, we never thought we had a shot after the initial scoring came out for the cultivation permits. And I would say that we kind of lost focus for a little bit, because we just assumed that this was, going to get by us. But honestly, I wish we'd put twice as much time and twice as much effort into what we had put together as what we thought was a surefire application. So, as a short answer, don't feel too comfortable about what you got. Do a little bit more, because nothing is a guarantee. We thought that we had a home run and that, some old boy cronyism wasn't going to come into play as much as it had, but it did. And, just be adaptable, be ready to roll with the punches and move on to the next thing. If what you want wasn't, the number one goal wasn't achieved, make sure that number two isn't forgotten, because number two could be extremely lucrative. I mean, we wanted the full cultivation. We wanted that whole big operation, and it didn't pan out that way. But I guarantee we've spent a lot less money getting going than they have.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a lot of debt associated with our business right now that I'm sure a lot of the other guys do. So always do just a little bit more, be a little bit more prepared. And if there's a few extra actions you can take, you don't think you necessarily have to, just go ahead and knock them out.
Great advice. Great advice. Where can people that are listeners find out more about what you're doing? What's the best way for them to track what you're up to and learn more about your business?
The biggest thing for us is our Instagram. The state kind of restricts our ability to communicate too much with the public. So our Instagram profile and our Facebook page, The Source NWA, will be the best way to find us, best way to find information. We've got a brand new website at thesource-ar.com. We'll start to have probably some building updates and everything going on at our new facility. That'll probably be our best platform for getting the word out. But if you are a medical customer, we have an app on iOS and Android. So go ahead and search for the Source app. Make sure you download ours. But we'd love to, trying to help everybody, trying to find an alternate source of medication and source of treatment. So we're happy to help them any way you can.
Hey, thanks for coming on. Great conversation. Best of luck with everything that you're doing.
Appreciate you guys very much.
All right. Take
Thanks,
care.
Jeff.
We'll see you.
See you guys.